He's a former law enforcement officer. During his career, 2 of his friends, colleagues, and co-workers were killed in the line of duty. Their deaths had a tremendous impact on him. He's here to talk about the incidents that killed those officers and his life after. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is brought to you in part by the Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse drop-in social audio chat app. The app is free. Download today. Look for Clubhouse. And be sure to follow and join us in Breakfast with Champions, holding rooms every day of the week. You'll find friends from all over the globe. Motivation, education, inspiration, where everyone gets to see the table. That's the Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse drop-in social audio app. Both are free. Download the app today. Get more details at the bwcinfo.com. Calling us from the Richmond, Virginia area, we have Dennis Profit on the phone. Dennis is technically a former law enforcement officer. I'm using the term retired law enforcement officer. I'll explain why in a moment. Dennis, thanks so much for being a guest on the show. Very much appreciated.
Hey, Jay, thanks so much. It's great to be here. I really appreciate it.
When I say former and retired, there's very few things I'll correct people on. When anybody calls me ex-police, I always correct them. Ex means, in my opinion, you left a job under questionable circumstances. You're fired, forced to resign, whatever. Retired means either you left with a pension or you left early due to a line of duty injury, serving honorably by your own choice. And I think that covers you by saying you're retired.
Yeah, I think that would be correct. It just the way the retirement works here in Virginia, officially for retired is about 25 years with time and age. I left at 20 years of service, not technically with the age requirement to officially retire, but I decided to move from the law enforcement profession. And
there's a lot of reasons why, and we'll talk about those in a moment. 20 years is a long time. I want to say this right now. 20 years in policing it's a lifetime.
It is. And really there was several factors. For me, it was a profession that I loved. I'm a second-generation officer, so it's like say it's in the blood or in the family, and it was a great profession, but it did exposure to trauma, and the overall stress of the profession itself. And it came to a point where it had really taken its toll on me and had a lot of negative effects from that. And I ultimately made a decision that I felt was best for me, best for my family, best for my marriage, and decided to move on from the law enforcement profession.
I get it. I really do. One of the things I say quite frequently is, no one that does a career in law enforcement escapes unscathed. You're going to have injuries, physical, mental, emotional scars. That's a given.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's 100% correct.
And you're a little bit older. You're younger than me, but there have been tremendous transitions in law enforcement. But when I started as a rookie, it was very much the attitude of suck it up, buttercup. And I'm not saying that to be insulting. I'm saying we had a term. A phrase that we use, we are police. That's how they said it in Baltimore. You have a job to do. Get out and do your blanking job. We all had our injuries. We all had things that really bothered us. And you know what? I can tell you as I look back, Dennis, so many men and women I worked with came in and they were totally different people within 5 years.
No, I definitely think that that is true for the majority in law enforcement. I know for me, definitely 5 years in, you start noticing a little bit of a difference. And I noticed in my career, just the folks that I work with, particularly in supervision roles, I would see new officers come in, and I could actually see that change in officers when they start getting years on service. You see that transition and how that job affects them. And it's a slow, and sometimes, unfortunately, you don't quite see it. Looking back, I think the picture is much clearer for me that I can see just how much of effect it had on me over the years.
When you're exposed to all the violence, all the trauma, and it doesn't matter if it's on purpose, trauma, or accidents, it takes its toll. Quite often, I was on scene where the last thing this young man saw was my face as he's taking his dying breath. And I think every one of those deaths took their toll on me. And there came a point where, we did our best not to bring it home. You always said, hey, I'm married. I don't want to burden my spouse with this, my kids, and I was really good for a long time at mentally undressing. I'd always say, like the soft body armor. When I peeled that off, I would go from cop J to dad J to husband J. And that worked well for a very long time until it didn't anymore.
And I would say very similar for myself. You just kind of bury those incidents. You don't want to carry them home, like you say. But when you bury it away, it's just kind of tucking it in a corner. And I actually had experienced some times where there was incidents that were bad that I would completely 100% forget about. But then something would happen. I would see something or hear something, and for some reason it would bring it out of that back of that memory where I have just completely forgotten about that incident. And then it's almost like you're re-experiencing or reliving that all over again, but something would trigger that memory and it would come back, and then you're kind of dealing with that again and trying to bury it all over again.
What rank were you when you left policing?
Well, when I left, I was a corporal, and that was a change. That was actually through a demotion from my previous rank. The highest rank I held was lieutenant, but I left as a corporal. So
some things occurred. And
yes,
we'll go into those details in a moment. I want to backtrack. What year did you start your law enforcement career?
2001.
And what year did you leave?
I left in 2020.
So that's a long time. And the agencies, you started one agency and left your career at a different one, correct?
I did. I actually worked for 3 separate agencies. The last agency was where I spent the majority of my time, about 15 years of my time there. Started in Powhatan as a road deputy out there and spent about 3 years there before I went to the city, and spent 2 years in the city. And I ended up making a decision to come to Chesterfield, where I grew up. And, my father was a Chesterfield officer for a long, long time. So I felt I was kind of coming back home, making a first full circle and coming back home, if you will. And I came back to Chesterfield, where I spent the majority of my career there.
You got like almost 20 years on the job. And before I forget, Dennis, I want to thank you for your service. I really understand what it takes, and not just the toll it takes on you, but the toll it takes on your family as well. Are they all doing okay?
Right now, family's doing great. So thankfully now, due to a lot of changes and some adjustments, family is doing fantastic, really better than ever.
And a lot of that had to do with your decision to say, I'm done. I'm going to leave this career.
Yes, sir.
Even though it's one you loved. We're going to talk more about what, I hate the term trigger. It's overused. What caused the downhill slide for Dennis during his law enforcement career. It involves the death of 2 colleagues that were killed in line of duty. This is the Law Enforcement Show. We are talking with Dennis Proffitt, former retired law enforcement officer. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. There's a couple ways you can stay in touch and keep informed of what's going on with the Law Enforcement Talk radio show. Number 1, go to our website, letradio.com. Sign up for our email newsletter. It's real easy to find. I promise we don't spam you. I send out about 1 email every 2 weeks or so. And there's also a feature called broadcast channels on our Facebook page, where we send messages directly to your inbox, directly to your messenger. Real easy to sign up for. Make sure you like or follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. And up top, you'll see broadcast channels, one for free podcast versions of the radio show, another one top post of the day. So you too can stay informed quickly, easily, and best of all, like always, free.
Hi, I'm Julie Loken, CEO of the Mediacasters, an omni-media company obsessed with Breakfast with Champions every morning on the Clubhouse social audio app. This inspiring community helps me live a bigger, bolder life. And the best part? BWC is free. Download the Clubhouse social audio app today and join me for your daily dose of inspiration in Breakfast with Champions. Both are free. Online at thebwcinfo.com.
Return our conversation with Dennis Profit on the Law Enforcement Show. Dennis is a retired law enforcement officer. Served with 3 agencies. The last one he served with, he left early after 20 years on the job. That was Chesterfield County Police Department. And Dennis, there's really no way of sugarcoating this. And we have a lot of tough conversations on the Law Enforcement Today show. But part of the reason why I wanted to do this show to begin with, when it was first launched in 2017 as a podcast only, was for law enforcement officers, their family members, to talk about the stigma, to talk about things that no one talks about. And then, radio picked it up, and more and more people want to know what's going on. And this is your chance to talk about it. Unfortunately, in your career, you had 2 line of duty deaths that you had to deal with. These were colleagues, they were friends, and they had tremendous negative impact on you. Combining that with all the trauma you experienced, let's talk about the very first one.
Sure. The first one would be, Officer Gary Bureau. We both came to Chesterfield Police Department at the same time, and we were actually in a program for pre-certified officers to come to Chesterfield and attend if you will, an abbreviated academy, since we have already been police officers before. So we were in that academy together. Gary was originally from NYPD, and it was a small academy group. I think there was 8 of us in that class, small group. But, we hit it off right off the bat. He's just a great guy. Again, former NYPD, and, me as an officer always thought very, very highly of the folks that serve on that agency and what they deal with on a daily basis. So, we really hit it off outstanding. And we graduated, we finished up, and it was May 4th. And it was only shortly after we had finished that pre-certified academy that I got the phone call in the middle of the night, probably a little after 2 a.m., that Gary had responded to a domestic, and he and his partner had both been shot. Gary did not survive. His partner, fortunately, did survive, and actually was responsible for shooting and killing the suspect in that incident. But that was the call I received in the middle of the night, and it really kind of struck hard and kind of brought home a lot of things about the dangers of the job and just the sheer fact of my friend gone.
How old was Gary when he was killed?
Gary was 34, I believe.
Still a very young man. One of the things I know you're going to understand this. Most people don't really comprehend the amount of danger there is on domestic disturbance calls. It could just be, look, we had calls every Friday. It was the same family. They would call because so-and-so be drinking and then start a family fight. And most of the time, you get them settled down, you get them separated, you get them calmed down. It's just a lot of words, a lot of yelling, a lot of drunkenness, not any violence. However, from time to time, those things can explode and become extremely violent.
So when you're walking into a domestic, you just don't ever know what you could be coming into. There's, I remember so many domestics where they sound so aggravated as you're responding to it. It sounds like it's going to be a really bad situation, and you get there and it's not so much. And then other ones sound like they're not going to be very much to deal with. And when you arrive on scene, the next thing you know, you're struggling with a suspect or fighting with a suspect or there's a weapon involved. So it's just such an unknown factor when you're dealing with domestics.
I have 2 friends, then both from different agencies. One was from my own agency in Baltimore, and he was convinced he would go his career and never have to shoot anybody. And he was on the street within months, and the guy attacked him on a domestic disturbance call with a knife, and he wound up having to shoot the guy. And another one was a young female officer in a small agency in Florida. Both have been on the show before, and it seemed like a routine call, and she was shot several times with an SKS rifle and almost killed. So you really don't know what you're getting, is what I'm getting at.
Correct. Yes, absolutely.
Now, the incident with Gary and his partner, can you tell us a little bit about that? What happened?
Sure. It started off as a domestic, and from what I understand, there was some comments of the call that that the individual did have a firearm, but he didn't have it out. But it sounded like it was an argument, your domestic argument. And Gary and his partner arrived on scene. And when they came into the house, they went straight to the bedroom where the suspect was. And one of the first things they asked him, and from what I'm understanding from the reports from the incident, what happened is that he was facing away from them. And one of the first things they ask is, where's your firearm? Where's, trying to get an idea of where the firearm might be. And the suspect immediately turned around and opened fire on both of them.
So they really didn't have a chance. It was a surprise attack.
Correct. Gary was struck immediately and died right away. The other officer drew his firearm and exchanged gunfire with the suspect, both of them striking each other. His partner officer was hit 4 times, I believe, and he actually was struck in the hand where he lost his firearm during the gunfight. Suspect was still alive, and he actually had to go physically attack that suspect and wrestle his gun away from him and then detain him before other officers arrived, and then the suspect eventually died from his injuries.
One of the things, and I've been guilty of this myself, working in Baltimore and Richmond, by the way, beautiful city. I love Richmond, Virginia. I went to high school in Richmond, Virginia, in that area. I just love the area. But you're not surprised when there's lots of violence. And you think when you go into the counties, like Chesterfield County, you're thinking, oh, okay, it's going to be a little bit of a break from that. But that wasn't the case for you all at all.
It was not. And I think sometimes folks think, not quite being in the city, that sure, it's going to be a little lighter on the activity, but that's just not the case. In particular, Chesterfield backs right up to the city, so a lot of your crime and situations will spill over into the adjoining jurisdictions, and Chesterfield is one of those. And it can be active at times.
Yeah, I'm as guilty as the next person. When I was a young police, and there were times where I thought, man, those guys in the county, when I say guys, that means men and women, they have it easy. They got a cake, we used to joke, the department gives them their socks, their underwear, they have take-home cars, and they're not dodging bullets all day. Well, the truth is, they were too. And I just didn't, I was so self-centered, Dennis, all I knew was what I was going through.
Sure.
My coworkers as well, and we can talk about officers left Baltimore, went to Prince George's County, Maryland, that were killed, went to Norfolk, Virginia, that were killed in the line of duty. When we return to our conversation with Dennis Prophet, we're going to talk about another line of duty death from a colleague, coworker, how it impacted him. If you're on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app, be sure to look for me and follow me. My name's John, the letter J, Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y. You can also search for @LET Radio Show. That's John J. Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y, @LET Radio Show on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app. This is Law Enforcement Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Breakfast with Champions is the tool I use in the morning to get myself ready to face the world. There is so much negativity as you move about your day, from traffic to politics. The conversations are motivating and inspiring, and I can face the world with a positive attitude. So join us in the Breakfast with Champions rooms. Download the Clubhouse app today for free and join us soon. Online at www.thebwcinfo.com.
One of the questions I get all the time, why are you always promoting the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page? Well, because there's no better place on Facebook. That's it. It's simple. Everything about the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast is right there, including great photos, stories you'll want to see, you'll want to share, memorials to law enforcement officers who were killed in the line of duty, all that and more. Plus, old episodes of the show can be found on our Facebook page. Just do a search for Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show on Facebook and be sure to click like and or follow. We'll see you there. Return conversation with Dennis Prophet on the Law Enforcement Show. Dennis is a retired law enforcement officer from Chesterfield County, Virginia, which is outside of Richmond, Virginia. And unfortunately, you went through your career where I know there are many others that were severely injured, but you went through your career where you had 2 friends, 2 colleagues, 2 co-workers killed in line of duty. We talked about Gary Burrow in the first one. The second one, tell us the details about that.
Sure, and that one, that's Robbie Green, and he's with Powhatan County Sheriff's Office, and Robbie and I worked together, of course, where I started my career, and again, just a fantastic individual. I know everybody always says that about everybody, but it's the heart of this officer, this gentleman, Robbie Green, was immense. Just his dedication to that county and that agency, and I always admired that from him. And it was after I came to Chesapeake. Of course, this was 6 months after Gary had been shot and killed, and I took a little time off of work, but it was September of the same year, and there was a pursuit in Powhatan County. I heard it over the radio as they notified us that state was in a pursuit in Powhatan in case it was to come to our county. And as I was leaving, actually our lockup facility, going to head home for the night, I got a phone call from a good friend of mine from Powhatan and letting me know that Robbie had been in that pursuit. And during the pursuit, his vehicle left the roadway and had crashed, and he was killed in the crash.
Both of these are tremendous gut punches. The only thing I can describe. I remember working for the 12-1 shift, and I got the news that a former coworker, a former squad member that was in my first squad as a sergeant was killed in line of duty, and it was as if someone hit me in the solar plexus with a sledgehammer. It took a while to get my breath back. It took a while to respond. The state of shock was, I can't believe this happened. Did you go through that as well?
I did. It's something you just really can't describe. It is that gut punch. And particularly following 6 months of the last one, I know for sure I really hadn't reconciled that incident and everything surrounding that. And then for this one to follow up so closely, it was just, I was just at a loss, just a numbness and, a depression. And that's when really things really made a negative turn for me, emotional, on how I was dealing with just everything in general.
One of the things is we were required to do death notifications in person. Unless, of course, you were a police officer, then they didn't have a problem picking the phone and calling you.
Right.
I say that because we didn't treat our citizens like that, but we treated our police like that all the time.
Right. It's not a good phone call. Of course, it's not a good phone call, but it's just how you say that over the phone and how you receive that over the phone. It's just difficult. And I know for me, you're stuck for a moment of what do I do? How do I even process this? What can you do? And there's really nothing. It's a helplessness. It really is. It's a helplessness.
There's not a logical thought process that goes through this. And I know a lot of people want things to make sense chronologically. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. Then I began to do that, and I began to do this, and I deteriorated, and all these things. And it doesn't quite work that way. It's not a linear thing. But I do remember at some point, I used to think, I know this sounds stupid, I used to think, nothing bad will ever happen to me. We all walked around with that mindset. Otherwise, we'd never leave the squad car. We'd never leave the station. If we really thought about what bad stuff could happen, we never would have done our job. So it's kind of a self-protection thing. But I thought, hey, this bad stuff will never happen to me because, I'm just really good at what I do. I've got really good coworkers. And then, the problem with that is some really good police that I knew that had really good coworkers were killed. And it just didn't make sense anymore.
Yes. I struggled with that again, and I agree that we all have that mentality again, or you're not going to get out the car, you're not going to respond to those high-stress incidents. But then with those two deaths, those are two folks that are pretty close to me that I thought were equally good, if not better officers than me, and they were taken, and it brings in some of that reality, brings in some of that stress. I do remember, after Gary's incident that, there was for a while it was in my mind more than it should have been. There was a lot of concern. I was made sure to get back to work, and I was making myself make as many stops as I could, go as many calls as I could, to kind of force myself to not have that in my mind, if you would, not have that fear in the back of your mind of what can happen. And it creates a lot of stress if you start having that concern constantly throughout your shift.
It's almost a way of inoculating yourself from the potential what can happen. And also, it's like, I'm not going to acknowledge, you hit a very crucial word, I'm not going to acknowledge the fear. And I'm almost going to be like Superman when I go and do my job. I'll be super cop. And I'm going to do everything the right way, and I'm going to be the best of the best, and I'm going to be a sterling example of how you should behave as a police officer.
Yes, that's very accurate. I think for me too is not acknowledging that fear. The other part of it was, is it true? I mean, there is some fear there, because that's what makes us cautious. That's what makes us take all this officer safety measures, because there is some fear of what can happen, but you also, for me, you don't want to acknowledge that fear, and then it begins to mess with you mentally. That that you're fighting that natural fear you should have to keep yourself safe, but it's also creating stress, because you're trying to tell yourself, "I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid," and you're forcing that issue, if you will.
One of the negative side effects of these sorts of exposure to lots and lots of trauma, and the critical instance you went through, is that people start becoming, for lack of better words, unmanageable. They start developing anger issues, and anger management becomes a real issue. Did that happen to you?
Jay, that was a huge issue for me. And I think the combination of the trauma, the combination of some complicated grief from those losses really affected my demeanor, my mood. And I tell folks when they ask me, about this and we discuss it, and the best way I can explain it is I was just non-functioning. At work, I was functioning fine. I was laughing, joking, happy, just upbeat, and nobody would think anything different. I was the guy joking in the room constantly, having a good time. But as soon as I got home, I was non-functioning. I wasn't talking. I was avoiding everybody. If I was talking, it was an argument, arguing over the smallest things. I had, what I call a flashpoint, the smallest thing set back in a day, which most people would not be such a big issue. For me, it would completely ruin my entire day. And it didn't take much for my anger to shoot up, substantially. And I call it that low flashpoint. Just the littlest thing would make me so angry at everything and everybody. Everybody around me walked on eggshells because they're afraid of what they're going to say or what's going to set me off. And it just progressively got worse. And I couldn't manage it. I couldn't manage it at home. I started, again, like as I mentioned, I started avoiding home. I started avoiding my family. And it led to just some really poor coping mechanisms. And unfortunately, at that time, this was my first marriage, and it's difficult as to talk about. I got to where I was avoiding home and staying away from home, and that led into going into, again, the bad coping mechanisms, and I ended up stepping outside of my marriage.
On that note, let's take a short break. We are talking with Dennis Proffitt. He is a retired law enforcement officer. We're talking about, and I hate this term, post-traumatic stress disorder. I hate the D part, the disorder. We're talking about post-traumatic stress, what he went through, line of duty deaths that really negatively impacted him and his family life. We're going to take a short break. This is the Law Enforcement Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk radio show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. Newsbreak is your #1 local news app for current events, free live news for you and your community. Download the Newsbreak app today for free, and be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk radio show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. Return conversation with Dennis Proffitt on the Law Enforcement Show. Dennis is a retired law enforcement officer, doing 20 years and 3 agencies, and post-traumatic stress got to him. and created tremendous problems. And for many reasons, which he'll explain, he decided to walk away from it all. Before we went to break, we started talking about your journey and how life began to change for you after the deaths of two of your friends and coworkers. And I know there's a lot more to it, but for time purposes, we can't talk about all that.
Sure.
One of the things you said that really struck and resonated with me was, look, when I was at work, I was good. I was really good. But when I got home, I was really bad. When I have time where my mind is not occupied, even today, I call it the Sunday blues. Things start to change. I had to stay busy. When I was at work, it became a huge coping skill. I knew what my job was. I knew what my roles was. I knew where I fit in with my comrades and colleagues. I knew all of it. And yeah, I kind of liked the adrenaline rush of it. I kind of got addicted to it. But man, when I got home, I couldn't unwind, and I was just, everything set me off.
Yes. And I experienced much of the same. And, before we went to break, I mentioned that the bad coping mechanisms came in. And unfortunately, with the avoidance and me avoiding family and home, it led to my infidelity, and which is something that's difficult to talk about. It's not something I'm proud of, but it is something that occurred.
And unfortunately, it's all too common. It's not rare.
Correct. It is. It is, unfortunately, very common in the law enforcement profession. When it's happening to you, you think you're the only one dealing with it, and that's just not the case. What made it even worse for me coming down the road is I was able to make a recovery from them. My marriage did not survive in that one, but I was able to make a somewhat of a recovery. Working still work was always functioning fine, and I was at this point living on my own. Work, I was excelling. I mean, I got a promotion to detective. I got a promotion to sergeant. I got a promotion to lieutenant, and things seemed to be steaming along fine. And then as a lieutenant, I had gone to midnight shift, and all the same demons, if you will, that were tucked back away started to raise up again. And I struggled to keep that away. And unfortunately, it just continued to compound and pull at me with distress. At this time, I had actually met my current wife, and we had started dating, and that lasted for a while as I was really worried about getting close to somebody. But we stayed together. We ended up getting married, and things were great. We have a blended family with 5 children, my 3, her 2. But I began to struggle with those demons again, and that's when I took a significant downturn, even from the first time, of completely, again, not functioning, not being able to speak to anyone, not being able to cope with really anything. And my anger was even worse. It was at a terrible spot. Now, I did go and start speaking to a psychologist, but unfortunately, I know for a lot of police officers, it's difficult to talk about these things because you feel it's a weakness. And even with a psychologist, I didn't begin to open up about everything that was going on. I still kept everything guarded. And what that did was just made me continue to spiral downward. And then yet again, I found myself avoiding home, avoiding my marriage, avoiding my family. And yet again, I fell into infidelity for a second go around. This time around, it became an internal affairs investigation. And without going into a whole lot of details of internal affair investigation, I'm on administrative leave for over a month. And the result of that investigation, because of my position as a lieutenant, and the other party was another member of the department, a junior member, it was deemed that I was going to take a demotion back down to corporal. And that was significant. So at that time, I'm facing a demotion.
That's a huge thing to overcome. I'll be honest with you. And before people get judgmental, and it's very easy to do, I had my issues. I really struggled for a long time. Infidelity was not one of my issues. However, all the other coping skills are ways of trying to deal with these things I went through. And I used to sit in judgment of those who did things differently. I don't do that anymore. And for anyone who's thinking that, I want them to understand very quickly. And there's really no nice way of putting this. And I'll shorten it, when things get really bad with post-traumatic stress, quite often law enforcement officers will look for any kind of adrenaline rush they can, anything to get themselves out of themselves. And infidelity becomes an issue. Substance abuse becomes an issue. Anger becomes an issue. Isolation becomes a huge issue from family and loved ones. So I look at it as symptoms of and here's a term, disorder. But I look at it as symptoms of an injury that are predictable, that are common, and they're not unique.
Yes. And I appreciate you for going into and explaining some of that. And that's, I think, gets lost in the translation sometimes. But that's exactly what I was resorting to, is looking for something that brings a high, brings me to a high point like I feel when I'm at work. And it got me to separate from all the other things that I could not deal with. And it was an escape, much as alcohol or, like you say, narcotics or something like that, or escape for somebody else. It was the escape for me. And, at that point, things had gotten really bad. I did return to work as a corporal. It was a difficult situation to walk into a roll call, going from commanding a roll call to walking in as an officer to a roll call. It was difficult. I would say part of what helped me get through that was I did have some great support from the officers on the department that had worked for me, that had reached out. A lot had reached out to me with encouragement. Fortunately, which seems to be an anomaly today, the current chief of police that was there that would actually, sign the final disposition was very encouraging for me. He spoke to me and encouraged me of being able to come back, and there's no judgment, and and being able to get myself back to where I was, and that was encouraging. But it still was difficult, and probably a few weeks into being back on duty, I felt that I could not recover, and that there was not going to be, that I had let everybody down, that what I had done was unforgivable. I felt I was on the verge that my marriage was gone, my family was hurt, my career was severely damaged, and then you get into this really, really dark hole where you just don't see any light. You just don't see any recovery. You feel that you're completely damaged and you have ruined everything around you, and that's a tremendously terrible place to be. And unfortunately, that's when the suicidal ideology starts to come in.
And that's what happens. It's a triad. When you have disciplinary problems at work, relationship issues, post-traumatic stress issues, quite often there's substance abuse or other issues. And what's compounding all that is this deep sense of shame. Were you ashamed of where you got to in your life?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I still, to this day, there's points where I struggle with that over what happened. But I think by me talking about it and owning it and making a recovery is how I defeat that. But I had a lot of shame. And, and I'll tell you, I had made the plan. I had planned that I was going to end my life, that everybody around me was better with me being gone. I had actually written a note. I was going to write several. There's just too many writers. There's just too many people. And I wrote one. And I had planned on how this was going to go. And I wanted to put some things in place for my family when I left. And that was just the mindset that was going to be better all the way around. And
for one, I'm so glad you did not go through with it. Obviously, you made some really tough choices, but your life is much better today. We're almost out of time. How would you describe where you're at today?
Today, I'm in a great place, and a lot of that would come from, of all people, my wife, who, as much as I put her through, she refused to give up on me. She refused to give up on me. We attended a service a church service here that she encouraged for me. And there was a turning point there, that I did not have to live with this shame. I did not have to live with these things on my shoulder. And it made a huge turning point for me. And getting out of the law enforcement profession has taken a tremendous amount of stress off me. And, my quality of life has increased tenfold.
One thing is, I tell people, when I got hurt and retired, I didn't know what to do with myself, and I really, really went through some dark days, but it's one of the best things ever. The worst day of my life was the day I retired from the police department. Where can people get in touch with you for more information, or if you can help with speaking, or whatever it might be?
Well, the best way to get hold of me, really, the only social media I have right now is LinkedIn, but I am on LinkedIn. And that's a great way to message me or get in contact with me, anybody on anything to do with post-traumatic stress injury or emotional wellness, resiliency, things like that. I'm working a lot with those things. So
well, Dennis, thanks so much for telling your story and being a guest on the show. Very much appreciated.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jay. I really do appreciate it.
Do you want to be a guest on Law Enforcement Talk Radio show and podcast? It's really quite simple. And before you get into this notion that I'm not a cop, I wasn't a cop, I don't have something to contribute. Well, the show is about investigating crime. That's one aspect of it from the real life perspective of those who did it. And then it's also about trauma. How trauma impacted them, often crime-based, but not always. Our guests quite often are law enforcement officers, other first responders, military, victims of crime, their spouses, or survivors, talking about how trauma impacted them, what happened, how it affected their lives, and how they rebuilt their lives after. If you want to be a guest, just contact me. It's really simple. Send an email to jay@letradio.com. That's jay@letradio.com. Or go to letradio.com and the Contact Us page, and you can get me right there as well. I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or two or three. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.